Okay, so let's start then with the first definitions that we have to deal with. The first definition is the definition of a variable. So as you can see, the definition of a variable is that it is a characteristics of an item or an individual. It defines a unique relationship between the individual or the item and the value of the variable. Now, this is a very complicated way to say that a variable actually corresponds to a question that you have in the questionnaire. So, for instance, when you ask the respondents, what is your age? Let's say 35. Well, the variable itself is the age. And the age, of course, will define this unique characteristics for each individual. So 35 would represent the value of the variable for an individual. So remember that the variable is what you ask in the questionnaire. They correspond to a characteristic of the people that you're going to sample, to interview. The outcome then is the value that is associated with each individual for a specific variable. And it is also called a modality. I will use this word as well in the future. So the outcome in the example that I have just given you for the variable age, I gave you the example 35, so a person who is 35 years old, the value, the outcome of the variable age is 35, or the modality, it's the same idea, is 35. What is important here to remember is that the nature of the outcome, that is whether the outcome is a number like 35 or a word, a concept, let's say the gender would be, for me, would be female, that will have an impact on the definition of the nature of the variable that I will explain in a moment. Now, another definition is the idea of a data point or an observation. The data point is the combination of all the values for the variables for each individual. So that corresponds to a line in the data set that I showed you in Sphinx Campus. Remember, we have one line in the data set, and this line corresponds to the responses that each individual has given for all the variables. So that is a data point, one observation. Whereas the data is a set or the collection of the individual values associated with a variable. Okay? So this is the entire set of observations that we have. So it's the matrix or the spreadsheet that you have seen in Sphinx Campus last time. All right, so now that we understand what the variable is, what the outcome is, and also what a data point is, now let's look at the definition of the various types of data. Let's look at the definition of different types of variables. There are two big types of variables. The first type of variable is called categorical variables. Now, the categorical variables are also called qualitative variables. They have values that can be placed into categories. But more importantly, the outcome of categorical variables are words or concepts. The second type of variables is numerical variables. They're also called quantitative variables. And so the outcome of quantitative variables is always going to be a number. We have two types of quantitative or numerical variables. We have discrete variables Discrete variables are always indicated by an integer number, so 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, whatever, and they result from a counting process. Whereas continuous variables, they can take any value between 0 and infinite, so they can be integer, they can have decimals, and they result from a measuring process. So let's look at some examples for these variables. So in the case of categorical variables, typical examples would be marital status, where you have a category single, married, divorced, widowed, and so on. You can also have political parties that can be a categorical variable. You can have the eye color, that is a categorical variable with the various colors. You can have the brand of a car, that is a categorical variable, and so on and so forth. Then in terms of numerical variables for discrete variables, the number of children is a discrete variable. So children, they are only integer numbers. The number of items that one would find that are defectious on an assembly line, they are integer, and we will count them, okay? Then for continuous variables, typical variables would be weight, age of a person, but also the voltage of a specific machinery. So these are variables that can be measured on a scale that goes really from 0 to infinite, and where what is important, the big difference with the discrete variables is that they can take on decimals. Now, let's see more in detail the measurement for the categorical variables. Within categorical variables, we also make a distinction between nominal variables and ordinal variables. A nominal variable will classify the data into distinct categories in which no ranking is implied. So if we take, for instance, the possession of ownership of a personal computer, that means that the variable of the question will be, do you own a personal computer? You will have two categories, which are yes and no. Now, we cannot imply that yes is better or bigger or smaller than no. This is what we mean that there is no ranking implied. If I take the second example, which is the type of stocks owned, so we can have the stocks which are from a stock market, we can have growth stock, value stocks, or other types of stocks, where there is no real ranking implied between those various categories. Alternatively, when we talk about ordinal variable, we are still dealing with categorical variables, meaning that there will be, the outcomes will be categorized in specific data sets, but there is a specific order. And so if you look at the example, you will see, for instance, that the student class designation, we designate students between the 4 different levels that they belong to, let's say Bachelor Year 1, Bachelor Year 2, Master Year 1, Master Year 2. So in this sense, there is a specific order that is implied, in a sense that Bachelor Year 1 comes before Bachelor Year 2, and so on. Age category is also a good example. We are dealing with categories, but there is a specific order that is implied. So just to recap, what is important to know here is that we have basically 2 big categories, 2 big types of variables. We have qualitative variables or categorical variables and quantitative variables. Categorical variables have outcomes that are words, and they will be categorized into categories, whereas numerical variables or quantitative variables have as outcome numbers. Numbers that can be integer numbers or decimal numbers.